Hello. Well, it's going to be difficult to speak after Majid. Never again. Growing up in Germany, in post-war Germany, that was the mantra I and my entire generation grew up with, and we believed in. It's something we repeated day in and day out. We believed that the horrors of the Holocaust, that anti-Semitism, that hatred were things of the past. We were living in a tolerant society, in an open society. Fast forward a couple of years later to Paris. That's where I arrive after having spent time in several European countries. I am so excited. Paris, the city of light. I have huge admiration for France, the country of human rights, the country of enlightenment. And obviously the nice things, like cheese, wine, and all of these nice things. But let me tell you, I was up for quite a surprise. While the wine and the cheese were really nice, it was really, really horrible to witness in the beginning of the years of 2000 anti-Israel discourse that was entirely disproportionate. Israel was described in the media as a genocidal apartheid state, as killing intentionally poor Palestinian children. Now, in itself, this was problematic and extremely upsetting for me. But I had the conviction that this would also have consequences on the ground in France. And unfortunately, I was right. In the beginning of the years of 2000, we saw a huge uprising of anti-Semitic acts in France. We went from a couple of dozen anti-Semitic acts in the late 90s to 400 anti-Semitic acts in the good years and nearly 1,000 anti-Semitic acts in the bad years. And then there were the terrible years. The year of 2006, for example, when Ilan Halimi, a young Frenchman, was kidnapped, tortured, held hostage for 24 days, and ultimately killed because he was Jewish. Now, it didn't help that the French government, in the beginning of the years of 2000, did not want to recognize the problem. It left the Jewish community with a sense of loneliness and despair that was undescribable. 15 years later, today, the situation has changed. This government, and also the previous government, have not only recognized that we have a problem of anti-Semitism, but that have made it its priority to condemn and combat anti-Semitism. But things on the ground have changed as well. 15 years later, 9 French Jews were killed because they were Jewish. And people worry. French Jews worry. How could they not? Let me make you a confession. We're in such a small audience. I worry. I worry every single day. I worry when I bring my kids to school. I worry and ask myself whether I'm a responsible mother to continue to live in a country where they are exposed to such a security threat. We go to Jewish events, to weddings, things that are supposed to be joyous, and we talk about it every single time. It's a priority for most Jews in France. And in 15 years, anti-Semitism has had the time to become structural in several aspects of French society. You just heard from Majid. There are 3 parts: the traditional extreme right, the anti-Zionist extreme left, and yes, let's be honest, certain parts of the Muslim community. So let's talk about the latter, because this is why we're here today. There are not a lot of studies that exist on Muslim anti-Semitism and radicalization. What we do know, and this is largely because poll had been done by a partner organization of AJC a couple of months ago, is that anti-Semitism is very much present among French religious Muslims. What we also know is radicalization is growing amongst young people. Today, between 1,500 and 2,000 French foreign fighters are involved with ISIS in Syria and Iraq, and it's growing. What we also know is that the battle against anti-Semitism, the battle against radicalization, the battle for French democratic values can only be won together with Muslim communities. So what should be done? Well, I think to some extent, the mantra I lived with of never again can be a little bit of an inspiration. What Germany did after the Second World War is it was incredibly courageous. It didn't have a lot of choice, but it was incredibly courageous. Was to confront themselves with the past and to address the very difficult questions. And I think this is, in this context, what we need to do as well. Both in our dialogue with the Muslim communities, but also within our own communities. So what does it mean? First and foremost, we need to recognize that we have an Islamist anti-Semitic problem. For far too long have we avoided addressing the issue. Probably a lot of the time out of good reasons, out of good intentions. Because we do not want to stigmatize a community that itself is suffering from racism and discrimination. But I think you have an expression in English that says the way to hell is paved with good intentions. I think this is what it is. It's not serving anyone, neither the Muslims nor the rest of French society. Second, Muslims themselves need to be honest and address the problem of anti-Semitism and radicalization within their own communities. It is absolutely essential. For far too much, I have always heard Muslims hide themselves behind what they call, or what some call Islamophobia, or compare their suffering with the suffering of the Jewish community. They need to address the problem that is happening within their own communities and within their own faith. Third, I think the Jewish community needs to admit that we have a problem of anti-Muslim racism in European societies. We need, as Jews, to defend universal human rights and to stand by those who suffer from discrimination. And fourth, I think it is very important to talk about the elephant in the room, and that is Israel. I have participated far too often at conferences where we all say we're Abraham's children, but at the end of the day, we don't talk about the difficult issue of Israel. And when something happens in Gaza, we quickly forget about it. It is important to talk about Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We at AJC have brought delegations of Muslims to Israel, and I can tell you that the conversation afterwards, it's not easy, but the conversation afterwards is much more constructive. And lastly, and Majid again talked about this already, I think it is very important that when we speak and reach out to Muslim voices, we need to admit that we sometimes have a tendency to want to speak to the religious, representative voices. Most of the times, they're not representative, and they don't share our values. I think we need to define the parameters in which we want to work. So we need to support often young, secular, and reformist voices who share with us our values. So to sum up, I think to some extent, the fact of being here today is actually quite symbolic of what needs to happen. What needs to happen is that we are not afraid of defending the values that we stand for, and not shying away from addressing the very difficult questions. Maybe then, never again can have meaning again. Thank you.